Well, hello there. Richard Tubb here, coming to you live from the Acronis Cybersummit 2022 in beautiful Miami Beach. We are broadcasting live from the Acronis Cyber Studio, right in the heart of the CyberFit Summit area, where 1,500 plus of the world's top managed service businesses, IT and cybersecurity professionals have come together for 2 days of learning and networking. And amongst those 1,500 people are some true legends in our industry, and I'm joined by one of them today. Erick Simpson is somebody I consider to be one of the true architects of what we now know as the Managed Service Provider channel. Erick co-founded, developed, and sold one of the first pure-play MSPs in the industry, and then co-founded MSP University and authored 4 books, all of which I read as a newcomer to the MSP industry when I started out, and which strongly influenced me to this day. Now, Erick has got over 3 decades of experience in the IT industry, serving as an enterprise CEO, VAR, MSP, vendor, educator, advisor, speaker, and consultant. In short, this man is a true legend in our space. He's blushing, but Erick, welcome to TubbTalk.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thanks for having me. You're very kind. I appreciate those kind words. It's been quite a journey, I must say.
We caught up yesterday to give you an idea of this man's modesty, and I referred to you as a legend in front of other people, and you said, "No, I'm not a legend. I was just in the right place at the right time." I think you're underplaying the impact that you've had on people like me and others, though.
Well, I do appreciate that, and it's personally rewarding to hear, that my struggles and my successes and my journey, my being able to share that with others has actually helped them. And that's what really drives me these days. I love working with entrepreneurs. I love working with teams to, figure out ways to move the needle together. That's what really is exciting for me, at this point in my career.
Yeah. I was reflecting back on the very first time that you and I met in person. So I said I was a bit of a fanboy of your work. And then I think it was in Houston, Texas. Mm-hmm. We got together at an event, we met in person, and you took me out to a Lucha Libre-inspired restaurant, from what I recall, and me being a big wrestling nerd, that was a great time for us. That was probably sort of mid-2000s, I'm going to guess, and you were running MSP University at the time. How good's my memory on that one?
Yeah, no, it's pretty spot on. We ran MSP University kind of in tandem while we were still running our MSP practice, and then ultimately decided that there was so much more opportunity to help the channel and help others that we sold that practice, the MSP practice, in 2007, and then just went full on into developing MSP University, and that's where we grew a partner channel of about 30,000 IT providers, believe it or not, in quite a short period of time. And we were doing, when you met me and when we got together, that was at one of our MSP University boot camps, and those were 2 to 3 day events early on, and we would do those. It got kind of a little bit out of control. We kind of became an events company after a while, just teaching and training IT providers on, what we had learned about building an MSP practice. And we held 12 to 14 of those events a year. We were doing them internationally there. We ran those type of events for, I guess, 7 or 8 years almost. And during that whole time, we experimented with different other services for MSP. Some were successful, some less so. We tried marketing, we tried appointment setting. We did a plenty of coaching and consulting, online training, curriculum. We were early kind of in the LMS phase.
Learning management systems.
Yeah, learning management systems, online training. But that really, once you start doing a business like that, the event side of the business is all consuming. I mean, just the logistics of recruiting attendees every single month and then hosting and putting on these workshops and getting great speakers and others to come in, and then sponsors. It really, it was fun and exciting, but, looking back on it now, I'm glad I'm not doing any of that anymore, and instead enjoying these great events like we are here at the Acronis Cybersummit 2022.
Yeah. Well, let's rewind a little bit. So I refer to you as one of the architects of managed services. Now, I know that makes you blush, my friend, but it's true. You were one of the first people that talked about managed services, talked about recurring revenue of that nature. So let's rewind a little bit. What were you doing before you sort of coined that term, managed services. And, I'll give credit to our other friends here. So Carl Palachuk, Harry Brels for yourself. But you were the pioneers. You were the people who built what we now know as managed services. So tell us the story a little bit. Where did you come from before that and what happened?
So before I decided to start my own IT practice, I basically grew up in the enterprise. I started as a level 1 technician at an enterprise organization and worked my way up through the ranks there to, CTO roles. And then, before I left for the last year and a half, I was building out call centers and service desks for this organization's Fortune 1000 clients. So we'd go in and we would build out the infrastructure, the platforms, the systems. We would hire and train the technicians, and then turn them over to the client. And that's where I really learned everything I know or I knew about project management and service desks and KPIs and metrics and looking at cost and profitability. So when I in 1997 launched an IT practice with a business partner, and that's really where I took all those experiences and applied them to our IT practice. Now, let me just be clear. In 1997, even though I knew technology, like many of our colleagues in the industry, we think, hey, I can do this better than who I'm reporting to or whatever, and we hang a shingle. What I didn't know was how to run a business, and that was the school of hard knocks. And that's where we started looking at, okay, how do we sell? How do we price our services? And back then, we were doing what most IT professionals were doing back in the day. We were selling kind of time and materials-based services, break-fix services, and then projects. So we were a big project professional services firm. And what led us to start, and you used the term coined the phrase. I didn't coin the phrase managed services. We didn't know what that phrase was.
Yeah.
Right. To be fair. So what we did was we sold flat rate IT services. Right. So adjacent. Right. But what we were trying to do, Richard, was really get more revenue from our existing engineers. So we had a formula that we were tracking that said, oh, well, this is how much we could actually bill from an engineer's perspective based upon how many hours, they were working and what the bill rate was. And we quickly determined that to reach our revenue goals, we would have to hire something like 40 engineers in that model. And we were not interested in growing that much staff at all. So we started thinking about ways to get more from our existing technical staff. And that's when we started thinking about, well, what if we offered some sort of a subscription model, some sort of a model that would allow us to control the time that we deliver to the client and make the relationship and the performance objectives based. Like, we will do these things, we will monitor, we will respond to service tickets, but it was breaking away from that dollar for an hour kind of mindset that was candidly pretty challenging for us and super challenging for the clients that we tried to convince early on that was a good thing for them to do. So it really was a pragmatic approach to, generating more margin where we were constrained in the number of labor hours that our team could deliver to clients. And that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm not sure if I've ever shared this with you as a friend, but one of the things that drew me to your books and, the whole concept of what we now know as managed services, my background was in corporate IT. So I was very familiar with measuring and scalability and standardization of and that nature. I was a one-man jobbing IT guy crawling under desks, fitting Ethernet cables. And I thought, well, I want to grow a business, but there's only so many hours in the day, and I can't go beyond that. We've all got 24 hours in the day. And then I came across your books, and the whole concept of recurring revenue and getting away from that break-fix methodology, just works so well. Fascinating that, we fast forward, 20-odd years. There's still a lot of people out there doing that break-fix thing, isn't there? They essentially own a job and not a business. What do you mark that down to when managed services is quite well known at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are quite a lot of folks that, start off kind of at that same level where it's a more of a transactional business model. And I guess the way I would look at that would be from okay, well, if I'm working a job now, so I've got a daytime job or nighttime job, whatever it is, and I can only do service on the side, maybe it's easier for me to do service in a way that there's a starting point and an ending point. Like, I will install that server. It'll be 8 hours, and I get paid, and I'm done. And I think that allows these young entrepreneurs to kind of test their mettle, if you will. Like, okay, did I succeed on that project? Or what? Because you have that component that is confidence that has to be built up as well, sure. Right? I mean, a lot of us, may be afraid of stepping out on our own. There's risk there, right? This is my money that's on the line now. I'm having to, and can I do this? Do I believe in myself enough to where I can risk more, right? And especially, nowadays when the economy is what it is, world events being what they are, maybe there's a component or an ingredient of kind of a risk aversion, right? And I think once you start doing that and you're not exposed to communities and haven't yet experienced other peers talking or being at great events like the Acronis Cybersummit that we're at here, you don't have that exposure and experience. Like, for instance, a real story from my migration from the corporate enterprise to private practice was in the enterprise. I'm sure you'll remember, Richard, we had very expensive tools at our disposal, right? We had HP OpenView, we had Tivoli, we had all these things that were hundreds of thousands of dollars to monitor these, now ancient networks, right? But, the enterprise could afford it. And so when we go out into private practice, and we had ticketing systems and whatnot, right? Going out on our own, I actually coded our first ticketing system. It was a Microsoft Access database, later ported into SQL, right? But it was what we needed. And there were no RMM tools, remote monitoring and management tools, when we decided to kind of, start our practice. But by the time, I guess 2004 rolled around or so, we started seeing PSA vendors out there. We saw some remote monitoring and management and patching tools out there. And that's when I said to myself, okay, all of that experience and expertise that I had, amassed building out these call centers and service desks for other people, I could now do that for our company. Yeah. And that's kind of what propelled the acceleration towards this flat fee monitoring, responding on our terms, and I knew all of the tiering and the escalation and all that, right? I wrote about that in some of my books. And that's really what kind of accelerated things. But I think, back to your question, folks that start out, again, and today, there's so many more communities, such a huge community of goodwill, so many vendors that weren't back in the day, didn't even exist in many cases, and the ones that did exist weren't yet MSP friendly from a pricing and a business alignment perspective. And so the industry had to grow along with the MSPs and the MSP movement together. And, I'm just lucky that I was in the right place at the right time to kind of participate in all that, because I saw the challenges on both sides and, worked as, in my own way to try to bridge that gap. And I think that's what, hopefully, helped ease that transition for a lot of IT providers, as well as the vendors that I was talking to try to, coordinate and say, look, this is what these folks need. This is how we're building our businesses. This is what concerns us. And it doesn't make sense for us to buy, 2,500 licenses of something and pay that fee until we are able to deploy those solutions. So I hope in some way I was able to, kind of accelerate that understanding that, okay, well, if we're selling things as a subscription, then let's help our partners by offering pricing models and support that align with that model. And today, I'm happy to say, all the vendors at these great events and the ones that are serving the MSP community not only get that, but what's really surprising to me, Richard, is they're now, they've taken up the mantle that I think me and my company and MSP University was fulfilling back in the day, providing that training, that coaching, that consulting. So now we're seeing vendors jumping in to accelerate that, that business enablement component for MSPs, which, I sadly didn't have the opportunity to partake of back in the day.
You've hit the nail on the head. So it was about 2005 that I started my managed services journey off the back of your books. And as we mentioned, Carl Palachuk, Harry Brailsford. I was super, super fortunate, and I'm really open and honest about this, that at the time I was surrounded as this young geek, enthusiastic. I was surrounded by, the most successful entrepreneurs in the industry who wanted to give freely of their time and experience to others. Now, this is something for people outside the IT industry. It feels alien. I'm saying that the managed service industry is so special from that regard. And as you say, I spent a lot of time in the US with yourself and others learning all of this. The community aspect of it, just incredible. Really accelerated my growth, not only as a business owner, but as a human being there as well. Fast forward to today. Oh man, I don't want to sound like the old man of the industry, but the kids today have got it made because there is so much out there. We're at the Acronis Cybersummit, 1,700 plus people today. Every vendor that you speak to, thanks to the influence of yourself and others, are focused on helping you to grow your business. Whereas back in the day, there was an odd book here and there from yourself and Carl. There wasn't a lot of info, so you had to go to the individuals individually. Today, man, you are overwhelmed by this cool stuff, which I guess brings me to the question, like you're seen as a channel expert, thought leader, influencer in managed services, but how do you explain to people what you do today?
I don't think my wife or my kids even know what I do today,
Snap, yeah.
And both of my sons work for me now doing digital marketing and video production and things like that. And, we were at a dinner with some friends the other day, and my older son had some friends over, and they said, "Oh, so what did your dad do?" And, just kind of stumbled, right? And I sometimes do the same thing, right? And I just say, look, just business consulting. Just leave it at that, right?
Try and put a simple label on it.
Business consulting, yeah. But, you touched on something a minute ago, Richard, that I think is very unique about our industry. And it is the community, and it is the friendships that we built. I mean, I always say, look, we're the old dogs in the channel now, right? I mean, we're here to try to help those that come out and seek us, and we're happy to do that. But the community is something that I've never experienced before. Though it's so welcoming, and everyone is so friendly. And like you say, it's not a situation where you find in other industries where, oh, we're not going to share secrets because that's competitive advantage and things like that. And I've never found that to be the case. I mean, in general, I mean, in the communities and the friendships that I've cultivated, including yours and others, it's just been very enriching. And I think that when you have that, it certainly helps accelerate, the rising tide, lifts all boats. And especially when the vendors and the distributors came in really, to really support the growth. I think that we saw almost a hockey stick kind of a ramp, especially the last, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Let's talk about your books a little bit then. So you're the author of 4 best-selling books on managed services. Now, I can remember reading The Guide to a Successful Managed Service Practice, what every SMB IT service provider should know about managed services, in the year it was released. So that was like 2006, right?
Correct.
Yeah, it's been a huge influence on me. If you were to rewrite that book today, what would you say has been the biggest change in the managed service industry, since 2006?
Well, I am writing the follow-up to that book now.
I suspected you might be. There you go.
But it's huge, and I you're asking me to think of the biggest change. I think the biggest change, if I had to nail one thing, but I want to expand it to several others, would be the acceptance of this way of receiving services by end customers.
Right.
I think the biggest challenge that we had as an MSP was convincing, of course, the toughest client you'll ever have is an existing client that you've kind of treated as a VIP all these years, right? So that was the biggest challenge we had was, we talked to a client, say, hey, we're doing this new way of doing business now, and we'd like you to, pay us up front while we do all these things every month, and we'll provide you some reports and some consulting and things like that. And they'd be like, but Eric, you're the cheapest provider in town, and whenever something breaks, you guys are here so fast, right? Why would we pay you more in advance, for something that we don't really understand? And I think that, that we had, again, we didn't know when we started our business, so we were trying to provide the best service, the cheapest, the fastest, and all that, and we had painted ourselves into a corner.
Right.
But I think, the biggest transformational thing that I can think of is that it became an accepted way of receiving services. Outsourced IT, I think it had a negative connotation early on.
Agreed.
Right? And so the SMB and even, in the mid or enterprise now today, and thanks to COVID and things like that, we're even seeing a dramatic increase in co-managed IT opportunities for MSPs that were never able to sell co-managed IT to a mid or enterprise organization in the past. But because of COVID and the hybrid workforce and all that, MSPs were ready. We were in the right place at the right time. We had the tools, the processes, and we could serve the technical and cybersecurity needs of these hybrid workforces. So that was kind of cool. But I think the biggest thing was getting and it was because we had more and more providers promoting these services, and then, the vendors got behind it as well. And I think that was probably the biggest catalyst. If we had still had to fight for every single managed service agreement, we probably wouldn't see the dramatic growth in, the MSP business model that we see today. So that was probably the biggest thing, I think. And then, we can talk about some other things that I think were an influence as well.
Yeah, I want to touch on the co-managed IT. Now, I recorded an episode with the wonderful Vera Tucci, who's Italian IT entrepreneur, and she and her company, her MSP, absolutely nailing it in the co-managed IT space. And I'd encourage anybody listening to this, go back, listen to that episode. Vera, very, very smart and lovely lady. Internal IT departments saw us, and I say us as MSPs, as they viewed us really suspiciously. I'm not going to quite say the enemy, because if you think about it...
Competitors. We were coming for their jobs.
Yeah, they were like, well, they do things faster, better, cheaper than us. Why would we do that? Then, as you say, the pandemic came along, and I was speaking to Vera about this, and she said it really took off for her, because internal IT departments, and you and I both come from that corporate IT background. We know the tools, single tenant. They're not multi-tenanted. They're focused on looking after a single customer at a time. And the internal IT departments just don't have the breadth of knowledge. They don't have the RMM tools and things of that nature. So I noticed a shift, and I wonder if you noticed this too during COVID, where we went from being, the suspicious outsiders, the enemies, to, coming in, guys, we need to have a conversation with you about this.
Yeah, and today, I work with hundreds of MSPs directly, and that's what we saw. And then the other big opportunity that came along with COVID that accelerated it was, I talk about three things. It's cloud migration, it's cybersecurity, and it's, hybrid or remote workforce support. And those three things kind of were the perfect storm at that time, because obviously to support remote workforces, you need the cloud and you need cybersecurity. So now I think the biggest opportunity for MSPs is building out your cybersecurity, enhanced cybersecurity portfolio, and delivering that to customers and making sure that it aligns with their cyber liability insurance policies minimum requirements, And, I have a session today where I'm going to talk about getting every client to say yes to enhanced cybersecurity here at the Acronis Cybersummit. And some of the things that I talk about are, getting rid of clients that will not agree to enhance cybersecurity because the risk is so great, not only to them, but also to you as the MSP and by extension to your other clients. Because think about this, Richard. Let's say that 99% of your clients agree and say, we're going to take your cybersecurity portfolio. And I like, good, better, best. I do bundles and things like that. And I say, look, make your minimum bundle that you require every single client to take, and make that the minimum and then build from there based on what their needs are. And so let's say 99% take your advice and say, yes, strengthen our cybersecurity. We trust you. We need it. And 1% don't. Okay, so now you've got 99% of your clients paying you to sleep better at night because you're sleeping better at night because you're doing things in an automated fashion and monitoring and all that. And one client of that 1% now has a security incident. What do we feel we need to do now? As great human beings, we say, okay, let's go save them. Let's rescue them. Now, look what happens. We've not been enhancing their cybersecurity. We've not been monitoring for breaches and things like that. We have to stop serving our existing clients, go rescue this one client, and then figure out how we're going to get paid to do it. Because as you know, the cost of recovery from an incident can be catastrophic to some businesses.
Yes.
And because we haven't aligned our services to the minimum requirements of their cyber liability insurance policy, now the story keeps getting worse and worse, right? So they're not going to be able to file a claim against the policy because the underwriter or the insurance carrier is going to go, well, you didn't do any of these things you were supposed to do, so we're denying your claim. So it's a horrible outcome for all involved. So, I challenge MSPs to look inside themselves and say, are you, and reflect, are you willing to sacrifice your business because a client will not, do what's needed to protect their business? I mean, I always say you can't care more about a client's business than they do.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's tough in real life to come to terms with that. Sometimes we delay. Okay, well, we'll give them another 30 days, another 60 days. Well, we don't have that kind of time.
No. And again, you've hit the nail on the head there. You can't care more about the client's network than they do. Yet many MSPs listening to this, many IT professionals will feel that way, that, well, I've put advice to the client, they're just not listening. So that whole concept of essentially firing a client, whilst it sounds scary, you and I have both learned the hard way, it's necessary, isn't it? Because the reputational impact nowadays, not to mention the financial impact of the client, experiencing a breach, then turning around to you and saying, why didn't you protect us, Eric? And you're like, I've tried to. But it's absolutely crazy. So cyber protection insurance, things of that nature, is that something that you recommend to MSPs nowadays?
I recommend that they should have it, and they should put their oxygen mask on first before helping others. Like, we're traveling now again, right? So we're hearing that message when we're on an airline. So consume that, make sure that you're protected, and then absolutely require your clients to have a cyber liability insurance policy, because at the end of the day, as we just talked about, if something bad does happen, sometimes a client's pockets aren't deep enough to cover the remediation costs, not to mention the PR and all of the bad things that can happen. So we have to, it's like auto insurance, right? Remember the days, when I hear the objections all the time when partners say, well, my clients tell me that, nobody wants their data. Nobody's concerned because they're so small.
Yeah, we're not important enough.
Yeah, we're not important. Yeah, but you want your data, don't you? I mean, how are you going to run payroll? How are you going to pay your bills? How are you, right? They're not thinking, right? So, it's an auto insurance policy, right? We never want to experience an automobile accident. I'm certain that most of us have been in one, but that's there in case something happens. Can you imagine having to come out of your pocket to pay for another person's vehicle and your vehicle if you're at fault?
Yeah.
Holy cow, right? What would people do? So it's the same kind of a concept. So, when we write our managed service agreements or managed cybersecurity agreements, remember, those statements of work are a box of services that we provide. So we're going to do these services. Now, in case there is a breach, remediation is not included in that. That is what we're doing to try to, strengthen that posture so that, we can defend against breaches. But if something does happen, I never recommend for an IT provider MSP to say, "Oh yeah, remediation's included." Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can write that check. Maybe the cyber liability insurance carrier can, and that's why we need the policy, because now we can feel confident that the strategy is when there is a breach, and we talk to the client about this in advance, and that's we set it all up. So we say, okay, let's make sure that we're aligning our services to make sure that we're meeting those minimum requirements of the policy. So in case something does happen, right, in the unlikely event that the cabin loses pressure, there will be an oxygen mask that we can put on, which is filing a claim with the carrier and then having them, pay for that. And in many cases, Richard, as you know, some of these insurers decide to pay the ransom, right? Because they figure, okay, well, this is the best recommended way to go. And of course, that's a lot of money too. So again, we'd rather have that policy behind us, no matter what the appropriate response is, rather than rely on, a customer's bank account.
Yeah. Well, let's change tact from talking about oxygen masks falling down, Eric, because I've got a flight back to the UK later this week. You're making me nervous, man. Let's talk, but on a serious subject. We're at Acronis Cybersummit here today. My mind has been blown by some of the tools, the platforms that are now available to MSPs to help keep their clients safe. But I remember this from back in the day of running an MSP, and I speak to lots of MSPs now who face this problem. They speak to clients about the new latest cybersecurity protection that's in place, cyber protection, and the clients turn around to them and say, sounds good, but I thought you were already doing that for us.
Yeah.
So it becomes difficult to have that conversation about upgrading. What advice would you give to listeners if they've ever had that conversation and people say, look, we don't want to pay for more. We thought you were doing this for us already.
Yeah, that's probably the second biggest objection that we hear, right, when we're in the sales process with a client. If it's a prospect, they'll typically say something like, well, we have somebody that does that, right? So I'm going to weave that into the answer here. So there's we have somebody that does that, or if you're the provider, well, Eric, we thought you were already doing that for us, right? Why you want to charge us more? So in the first case where it's a prospect, because we're going to talk about, getting new sales here, the correct response to that is, so you have someone that does that for you already, Richard? Is that correct? Oh, yeah, we have somebody that does that. And what exactly are they doing for you, right? So it's just like, one of the steps to unpacking an objection and overcoming it, right? So what is it exactly that they're doing for you? And maybe they know. Maybe they say some things and you're like, okay, they're in the right ballpark, right? In your mind, you're thinking this. But then the next question is the killer. Are their services in alignment with your cyber liability insurance policy in case there's a breach, right? So I'm introducing some fear, uncertainty, and doubt there. And then the second point, and they say, well, yeah, they told me. How do they demonstrate that to you? That's the killer, right? So that's the killer question. How are they demonstrating that they're doing these things for you, and that if there is a breach, you will be successful in filing a claim and getting it approved with your insurance carrier, right? So right. I want to raise a little bit of a wedge, right? I want them to think about, I'm not sure if they are or not. And then you can say, well, look, why don't you allow us to do a cybersecurity assessment for you, right? It's non-intrusive, and you have a way to say, look, wouldn't you appreciate just having a third party objectively give you a scorecard on exactly what your cybersecurity posture is today? And that's the key, right? You're trying to close them on that assessment first, because that's where it's like back in the day, Richard, before, when we had our MSP, it was always the backup. We always did the backup assessment, and twice out of probably hundreds of backup assessments did we do that we didn't find something wrong that we could point to and try to win some business, right? So same thing with this. Now, if it's an existing client and they say, well, Eric, what are you talking about? We thought you were already doing this for us. Why do you want us to do something different and pay more for it? And I'm going to go back to an automobile analogy. I'm a car guy. Sure. I like restoring cars, in my spare time. That's what kind of takes my mind off of things. And so, I'll go back, and I heard this from a cybersecurity speaker at another conference, and they said, and I'm gonna swipe it because it's relevant. Remember the days, some of us do, you and I do, right? I don't know if a lot of other people do, but remember the days when there were cars with no seat belts? You could buy a brand new car and there were no seatbelts in the car.
Mm.
Remember the days when there was no anti-lock brakes? Remember the days when there was no airbags in cars? Remember the days when there was no third brake light? So all these safety enhancements come along as we identify risk, right? And we're trying to protect the occupants of the vehicle. And so the conversation is similar. And please, listeners, use this in your existing client conversation. Say, well, remember, the days when there were no seatbelts and anti-lock brakes and things like that? The risk has evolved. More cars on the road, more drivers, etc. So we have to adapt. And the cybersecurity risk, yes, 10 years ago when we set you up with IT support and cybersecurity and antivirus and anti-malware, it was great for then, but we've got to put some anti-lock brakes on. We got to put some airbags in. We got to put that third brake line because these cyber criminals have advanced well beyond those days. And, it's my responsibility, Richard, to make sure that I'm advising you to protect you from these things. And, there's statistics out there up the wazoo. You could search, any survey, cybersecurity survey, and find these statistics. You can really scare clients with, but you got to be careful on what statistics you present to clients. I've seen some numbers that say, the average cost of recovery for a cybersecurity incident is, who knows, $1.8 million, right?
Mention that to any SMB and their face is going to drop. So,
right.
Yeah.
But of course, these are taking into account every incident, in the industry. So you've got to kind of, whittle it down and choose the statistics that make the most sense for you. But at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is price out your services so your clients can't subscribe. I know I work with tons of partners, as I mentioned, and some of them want to deliver enterprise-grade cybersecurity for a small and medium business. And the price gap between what they're currently paying you for MSP services and what you want to sell them for cybersecurity can sometimes be 2 or 3 times higher than what they're paying. So you've got to be, you have to take that into account when you're pricing your services. And so that's why I say you can have a good, better, best bundle of services, and you'll build bundles for 2 audiences. So if you have existing clients today that you haven't got them to sign up for enhanced cybersecurity, that will be a bundle just adding additional cybersecurity to those existing agreements. And we typically do that with a statement of work that's added to your existing MSA, right? Now, for new prospects, you're going to have the hybrid solution. So let's say you have good, better, best bundles of managed services plus cybersecurity. So now, let's say your entry-level bundle is not just managed IT services. It's managed IT services plus your essential package for cybersecurity, and that becomes your new offering for that one. Same thing with better and best. So when I say you're building bundles for two audiences, the existing clients, you don't want to sell them a whole new agreement with everything in it now and have that big sales conversation and potentially have objections that may drive them to go find another provider. You just say, look, it's only going to be an extra so much per month, which doesn't seem too much more than what they're paying now. Maybe 30% more a month is probably reasonable. And if clients really push back on that, you really got to take a hard look at that relationship, because the first question I ask partners when we're kind of doing an assessment at the year end going into the new year, which is kind of timely for right now, is to say, look, let's look at your clients list right now and let's segment them into A, B, and C customers. You remember that from the books and the boot camps.
Eric, and I'm going to give a public thanks to you here, not to go off at a tangent too much. I have used that A, B, and C bucket analogy so often when I'm on stage on this podcast. So for anybody listening to this has heard me talk about it, you know where I got this concept from now.
Yep, thank you. And, excuse me. So your C customers, excuse me. So your C customers are the ones that potentially may be your smallest revenue generating segment, right? But within your C customer base, I would say, look, you go in there and look and try to make A, B, and C out of the C customers, And for the C of the C customers, ask yourself, would I be more profitable if they weren't my client? Right? I mean, and it happened to us in our MSP. We had some C customers that after the final analysis were like, yeah, we'd be more profitable if they weren't our customer. But we always have the hope, the hope that, hey, their business is going to grow. We're going to be there for them. We're going to help them. But, quarter after quarter after quarter of zero profit or low profit on these customers, it's a double-edged sword, because not only are you not being as profitable as you need to be, but the other side of the sword is they're taking a service position in your client list.
Yes.
That's preventing you from finding another A or B client. And you could serve, I argue sometimes that if you have the right A and B clients, you might be able to serve a couple of those when you're replacing a, low-paying C customer, because they're consuming all of your services, right? They're paying you for enhanced cybersecurity. You're not having to react to things.
Yeah. We talked earlier on about firing customers and how scary that can be. And for anybody not familiar with the ABC, buckets for customers, real simple. Anybody listening to this, who are the clients who pay you on time? Who are the clients who listen to your advice, take action on it? Who are the clients who treat you with respect? Those are your A-list clients. Now, most people listening to this will have a few A-list clients, a lot of B bucket clients or B-list clients. These, they mostly listen to your advice, mostly pay on time. They're not too bad. But then the C bucket clients, let me summarize this with one quick image for you. The C bucket clients are the ones where their number comes up on the DDI at your help desk and you're like, Eric, I just want to give this up and go and run a fish and tackle store instead or something. We've all had C bucket clients. To your point, though, I learned really quickly about firing those clients that, whilst giving up the revenue is scary, the amount of energy it frees up for you to then go and work with better clients who will pay you more, respect your time, just makes everything so much more fun. So, yeah.
And I'll add one more comment to that. It makes your technicians and engineers so happy to see you taking action on these, because otherwise, and in this day and age, when it's so difficult to find good technicians and to hold on to them, they're looking for, any opportunity. Like you said, they're taking these calls from these noisy customers all the time that are disrespectful, that, talk bad about them to you and like, hey, your technician doesn't know what he's doing. We've all had that, right? I mean, I've fired clients because they've, cursed at one of my technicians on the phone or being mean or so we're not having any of that. That doesn't play in our book. But again, when your technicians see that you're going through this exercise, and I recommend going through it on a yearly basis, A, B, and C, and take a look at what C customers and in our case, right, we cared about every single one of our clients, whether they're an A client or a C customer. Sure. And so, we would help find them a home with another provider, right? And certainly help with the transition and all that. But I wrote a blog post about firing clients recently.
I read it, yeah.
So that
we'll include that in the show notes as well for the show.
That really kind of summarizes, hey, look, it's Q4. It's time to fire some customers. And I think it generated quite a bit of buzz, a lot of commentary, because, some folks agree with it, some folks don't agree with it. But I think I lay out the case pretty successfully. I used a sports analogy, right, in that when you're trying to get to the championship, whatever sport it is, football, soccer, baseball, whatever it is, you're trying to get to the championship, you've got to make some player trades along the way. You've got to put together the right team to help you get to the championship that year. And, you're trying to build a very successful MSP practice or MSSP practice, whatever it is, and you want to serve better and better clients. And so going through an ABC assessment every year, making more room for better A and B clients, you're making those player trades that help you get to your business championship every single year.
Yeah. You are on fire with the analogies, by the way. The auto with the cyber security, that really works for me. And the sports thing, this is why I look up to you, Eric. You've got these stories. So we are here live at the Acronis Cyberfit Summit, and we're in the beautiful Acronis Cyber Studio, which is a weird experience for us, isn't it, Eric? For those of you listening, we're sat in a studio with glass walls, literally in the middle of the summit there. People are walking past. People are watching us record this podcast. We're waving at people as it goes. Really enjoying the experience. It's somewhat unique, somewhat different. For anybody, go ahead, sorry, Eric.
It really is the biggest human fishbowl I've ever been in.
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
Oh, definitely. I've never done this before, so
yeah. We're encased in glass here on display for all to see.
It makes me feel a little bit, the US breakfast morning shows when they have them in Times Square. You can see all the people walking in the background. It's a little bit like that. We'll post some photographs so you can see what we mean to the show notes for this. So we've got people looking in on us now, and a lot of listeners are going to understand a little bit more about Erick Simpson. But I want to ask you as a friend, I want to understand what makes Erick Simpson tick. So, I've been in this space for like 20 years now. I still get excited speaking to MSPs. I know you do too. You've been a channel leader for 30 years. That's about right, yeah? And, what makes Erick Simpson get out of bed every morning at this point in your career?
Well, you're very generous. Thank you again. And I don't know if I've been in the channel for 30 years. I don't know if, I've been a leader for all of those years, because that takes, dedication and wanting to, improve yourself and that. And I think what excites me at this stage of my life and career is just, building great relationships with folks like you, Richard, and other colleagues that we've talked about on the show so far, and really working with folks that want to make things happen. I like being part of movements. I like seeing business growth. I like speaking to audiences. I like the energy of interacting with like-minded folks, and the community here is just so amazing. And having the opportunity to speak and work with folks to help them really grow. And the flip side of that is I really enjoy learning from the experiences. I read there's a book out there, and it's called $1 Million Consulting by Alan Weiss. And something in that, I read that years ago, and I try to reread it, once every year, along with a couple of other books that I really enjoy. And Alan makes a really bold statement in the book, and he says, and it's all about, trying to be a better consultant to your clients and to yourself, and to understand and grow your worth, to understand your value as a consultant, and really had, kind of driven some of my thought process about, the value that I provide, and then the fees that I charge and things like that, and not feeling guilty about it. Right. Because I think a lot of us, in our early careers, we try to project what a customer might pay for services rather than really sharing and demonstrating the value that's provided to them, and then charging a commensurate rate. Because at the end, we
make assumptions, don't we, over they can't afford this, or you ask them.
Yeah.
What's the worst that happen? They pull a face and say no.
Exactly. So Alan says, if you're not learning something new from every consulting engagement, and I expand that to any engagement, coaching engagement, conversation, I've expanded that in my brain. He says, if you're not learning something new, then not only are you doing yourself a disservice, but you're doing your clients a disservice. And, when you unpack that, and I realize that, like right now, for instance, here's a great analogy. So I've always done a lot of work in helping partners price and bundle their solutions and do that. And we've been doing a ton of cybersecurity work in that area. And I just started learning about the vast different types of services and solutions that different partners are using to solve the challenges. Acronis being a key part of that. But then to bring that information to the next client, and then understand what they're using to solve some of these challenges, and then bring that to the next client. And I'm learning about their specific vertical markets and the challenges that they're having with these markets. And that just makes me a better overall coach or consultant for clients that come, that I help afterwards. But also it builds my professional experience and expertise and confidence that I can tackle, a challenging situation with, whether that be a partner, whether it be a vendor, situation. And because of that, I've begun doing, channel program strategy and enablement and recruitment strategies with vendors as well. And it's just simply been because of that ability to say, I want to say yes to opportunities. I want to work with teams that are driven and that are excited about growth and don't see a challenge as an insurmountable problem, right? Because there's two types of people I think I've run into. I'm sure you'll agree, Richard. It's the type of people, and it's kind of like the person I used to be, and I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, the people-hating engineer. You know what I mean? I was the people-hating engineer. That means that, look, you could walk into my office and I'd be working in my monitors, whatever, my head to the screen, and you'd have a conversation with the back of my head. And then at the end of the conversation, I'd say something like, okay, just email me, and I'll take care of it, right? To evolve from that to be, someone that appreciates people. Right. And that was a big, I think, transformational journey that I went on to try to improve myself to become a better leader, a better coach, a better husband, father, friend. So now what drives me is really, instead of the technology that used to really interest me and drive me, now it's the people.
Yes.
Right. And understanding, everyone is a little bit different, and how to adapt your behavior to connect and communicate better with them. And I think that, that's something that I would hope that all MSPs would learn, because it really helps you have better conversations with existing clients, with your staff, right, with prospects, to really understand what you asked me, what makes me tick. I mean, how often do we as MSPs ask our clients that?
Right.
And in fact, that whole ABC customer segment thing, I didn't come up with. That came from a customer, a client of mine in my MSP when I was trying to, evolve personally and try to become more strategic. And so I started asking clients, hey, so, what is it that you want out of your company? What is it that you want to do? And what's your goal? And I had a client, his name was Scott, and he had an accounting firm. And I'll never forget this, because it was a life lesson that kind of I carry with me, and you're now promoting it as well, A, B, and C. He says, he said to me, and he had an accounting practice in Irvine, California, a very, pricey environment. And he said, I want to be the highest priced accounting firm in Irvine, California. And that was kind of an unexpected answer, right? For me, a novice, like, okay, I'm going to try to, show my client that I'm trying to be more strategic. And he says, well, I want to be the highest priced accounting firm in Irvine. And I went, well, how do you do that, Scott? How are you going to do that? And then he said, well, every year I segment my customers into A, B, and C, and I will sell my C client agreements to all these other accountants, and then I will raise my rates and bring in new A clients at my higher rate.
Wow. Yeah.
And I do that every year. And he did it. And that's when I learned that. And I went, holy cow, like, hit me in the head. That was brilliant to me. Yeah. So he brought that to me. So again, I learned something there. So, I just love interacting. I love working with, leaders. I love working with teams. I love, to understand what my role is in the engagement. Am I going to be the leader in this phase of the engagement, or am I going to be a team member in the engagement? And just to execute in a way that's measurable and meaningful.
Yeah. Well, do me a favor, Eric. Next time you speak to Scott, your friend there, say thank you from Richard from the UK, because I have taken that and I've used it within my own business after learning from you. So pass my thanks on to Scott. He's made me a lot of money over the years through that little tip, as have you. We're coming towards the end of our time here, but I just wanted to touch on something. You mentioned Scott and your clients being an influence on you. You've learned from them. I'm open and honest. Yourself, Harry, Brailsford, Carl Palachuk, massive influences on me. But who else influences you? Are there any people that you consider to be mentors or coaches of that nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would name the folks that you mentioned, as well as other folks in the channel. Amy Luby was also tip of the spear, along with Carl and I back in the day. Launching services for MSPs. But I would have to say that my biggest influencer has to be my grandfather. And my grandfather on my mother's side, he was an immigrant. My mom's family is Dominican, so they're from the Dominican Republic. So my grandfather was a Dominican. He moved his family to New York, and in my youth, we actually lived in my grandmother's house in Queens, New York, and it was there was a fully built-out basement there, and we lived downstairs. And my mom had married a U.S. citizen at that time, who became my stepfather. And I remember my grandfather was an accountant. That was his trade. He had learned this, and he had gone to school for it, and he would go do his day job every single day. And I was very young then. I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old, okay? And he would come home, and he wanted to become an entrepreneur. And I would, peek my head into he had his little office set up upstairs in the house, and I'd come in, his grandson, 8, 9 years old, and I'd see him, typing on this manual typewriter with, remember carbon paper?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we remember carbon paper. I don't even know if it exists anymore.
I'm going to have to do diagrams for some of the younger people listening to the show, maybe. So, yeah.
So he'd have carbon paper, and he's making duplicate copies, typing on this manual typewriter. And what he's doing is he's sending requests to manufacturing companies all over the world, trying to see if they'd send him samples of their stuff, and he would be their agent in the United States. And I just remember he would get things from, all different parts of the world, and there were boxes of kids' toys and all this stuff. And in my mind, being a young kid, I was like, oh, I want some of those toys, right? So it didn't really dawn on me until later how hard he worked. He'd be working late late at night every night doing this and trying to launch this this company, and I don't think he ever really made it, right? He never really made it, but he was an honorable person. He took care of his family. He cared for every single one of his family, and the way he treated friends and colleagues, I really looked up to him. So he's been an inspiration to me, and he's no longer with us now, but I'm choking up a little bit. But whenever I think of someone that I would like to be, have the same kind of, be known for, emulate those traits, it would be him. Very, very honorable, hardworking, entrepreneurial dream. Never actually achieved it. So I'm just, I just feel blessed and lucky that I was able to experience that. I think it drove me. And, in his memory, I appreciate the success that I've had.
Erick, thank you for sharing. What a wonderful story. And your grandfather sounds like an incredible human being. So what's next for Erick Simpson in the managed service space? We talked about you've been a channel leader for at least 20 years, 30 years, I'm going to say, but you'll argue the point with me on there. What's next for Erick Simpson in the MSP space?
Well, big plans for 2023. I'm going to launch a couple of new websites. So far it's been one website, ericksimpson.com, and it's served kind of two audiences. It's served MSPs that want to, learn how to improve their businesses, either through online training or through coaching or consulting with me. And then it's also served vendors and distributors that want, channel program strategy or sales enablement for their PAMs and BDMs internally, or enabling their channel partners that are already partners of theirs, or recruiting partners, so doing, webinars and marketing and things like that for them. Well, it's getting a little bit unwieldy, so now I'm going to split those, and there'll be one website focused specifically for MSPs, and then one website will be more of an agency type of website to serve the needs of my vendor and distributor clients. And, hopefully we'll grow the team a little bit next year as well to help us, even deliver more services to more clients.
Erick, great minds think alike, because I'm in the middle of going through that exact process with my own website
Wonderful.
as well.
Wonderful.
So there we go. You influenced me in more ways than you could possibly know. So I want to say a public thank you You're a great friend. I have learned so much from you over the years. And again, I'll never forget the time you took me to a Lucha Libre restaurant in Houston, Texas there. My first time spending time with you. Always a pleasure to spend time with you. Before we go, if anybody listening this wants to find out more about Erick Simpson, wants to reach out to you and continue the conversation, where's the best place for them to find you?
Well, for now and in the future, we'll still keep that website that'll kind of direct folks, but it's ericksimpson.com, ERACK Simpson.com, and can reach out to me there.
Erick, you are a legend. Thank you for joining us on TubbTalk. Really
Thanks so much for having me, Richard. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to continuing our conversation after today's talk.
Let's do it. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.